What's going on, everybody? Gar Hoover here, and today we're going to be going through my track Haze, which I made on the PO-33. It's kind of like a down-tempo track. I tried to copy some techniques from Fortet that I've heard in his music and apply it to the PO-33, and honestly, it worked out pretty well. If you're interested in the samples, you can grab the samples down below. I recorded the guitars myself, custom made a lot of the drum samples. Feel free to chop it, use it however you want. Tag me in it if you want to show me what you made. I always love hearing that. That being said, let's jump into this track. Alright, so as always, let's start by looking at the samples which I use for this track. Let's start with the melodic. We got kind of this pluck sound I made using, I think, Sculpture on Logic Pro. And then bass sound made in Massive, pretty simple. I think it's just a square wave with like a 4-pole filter on it. Another kind of pluck xylophone sound that I made in Sculpture once again because I love modeling synthesis. And once again, something more string-like, and as I was mentioning, really a big inspiration for this song was Fortet, and that means that I'm going to use more natural melodic type of samples that work out well. We got my drums. Let me turn these up. You can hear, once again, as always, I layer my samples so that I only need one track for percussion. So they're going to have the different hi-hats or shakers or things that I made. So you'll hear these. They each have a different hi-hat on them, or they're just clean, depending on which part of the song I'm working on. That is the guitar sample which I used. I recorded that on my Strat and then just ran it through some reverbs and effects and then put it right into the PO-33. And then we got these synth stabs, which are, once again, I think it's just Massive. I still use Massive a lot. It gets the job done for me. So with that, that takes care of the samples. Let's start with looking at the intro of the track. Alright, so let's get started with the intro. Then it just loops on and on and on. So as you can hear, first, the thing that stands out the most is the guitar part. I just trigger it on the first pattern, and it just goes for 4 bars. That's I decided to record kind of a 4-bar loop. And so if I time it perfectly and record it in the right tempo, which this is at 120 with some mild swing, nothing too crazy, because the guitar part, I did not record it with swing. And then I realized a lot of Fortet music has some swing to it. And so I added a little bit and it sounded awesome, but I couldn't do too much or else it sounded weird with the guitar, which wasn't swung when I recorded it. And what I did, because you can hear, I added a little bit of filtering because it has a little bit of a buzz in the high end that can be removed by just adding a little bit of filtering. So I just added that to reduce the buzz, the 12-bit kind of resolution that comes with, or something like that, with the pocket operators. So I resolved it with that. And so that just loops for most of the song, so I don't have to worry about too much with that. The drums really carry this song. So let me go to the drums. So when you look at like this first pattern, it's pretty simple really, but this is kind of the structure of the song in general. You get a snare hit on what will be the 5, so the quarter note, second quarter note, and then the second one comes a little bit later on the 11th step. And so that adds that swing. Instead of it coming in later on, which would be normal for like a 4 on the floor, it makes it kind of this more off-kilter feel. And the kicks are pretty simple too. There's one right there, and I believe there's one on 8. Yeah, and you can hear the difference. This one has the hi-hat layered because I have the hi-hats going in this first row. So these are just hitting on the quarter note every single time. And so in order for everything else that I'm using, other than the shaker, these do not have a hi-hat layered on them. So you can just hear it's a steady hit of the hi-hat taking place there. And so that kind of is how you get that nice off-kilter down-tempo feel. You hear that in a lot of direct songs as well. He's got a lot of that going on. And it's similar rhythm once again. Here going with this track, I just add additional little clicks right here at the end in the second pattern, and then it copies the first pattern once again in pattern 3. And as you can hear, the guitars aren't coming through because they aren't being triggered in that first pattern. And you can hear that other snare that's a different pitch. That's the snare that's going to be used later on once the kind of chorus, I guess you can call it, picks up. And you can hear a difference in volume between these two hits. To imitate what a regular drummer might do is to accentuate different hits. So I record this one in at a lower volume and then 16 in a higher volume. Especially with the swing turned on, it adds a little bit more character and life to the drums. So once again, you can hear that steady hi-hat kind of going on the quarter notes. And then in the background, you can also hear that there's this bass going on. Bass is incredibly simple for this. I love busy bass lines. I love ones that really arpeggiate or accentuate what's going on with the chords. But for this song, I kept it very simple because the guitar parts were complex and the drums were pretty busy. So there's just on the 1 and the 4 for all 4 of these. So boom, boom. And they're all just doing the single note, but except for the final one, it's an octave jump instead, as you hear there. And that just adds a little bit more intrigue, but that's really what's going on for this first pattern. It's pretty simple, but the guitar part really, I think, carries it because it tells you what chords are being played, but also kind of provides its own melody that's going on. And then we add on top of that as we look at the second half of the verse. All right, so for the second half of the verse, or maybe if you want to call it the chorus, I'm not sure. This song is just, I guess, an A and B structure. It's maybe the best way to put it. Let's listen to this. Couple things. Guitar's doing the same exact thing, nothing new there, just kind of carrying that melody. Bass line doing the exact same thing. If we were to look at that bass real quick, just so you can see I'm telling the truth, just on 1 and 4. Whenever you do anything on the even notes, when you have swing, it shifts them slightly back and it adds that bounce. So if you're ever thinking about turning on swing and you're frustrated because you aren't feeling it being swung, you got to make sure, are they just being on the even notes or is it on the odd notes? Because if it's just on the odd, where it's very clean floor on the floor, it's not going to get swung. The hi-hats really are where you're going to see the swinging if you have them activated, or snare hits that are off rather than just being on the 5 and the 13. You really start to feel the swing come through on those even sequenced notes. So with that, that's where you get a little bit of bounce with the bass line, even though it's a pretty simple one. Guitar's doing the same thing. You can hear there's a new melody that's taking place, and it's pretty simple. It's nothing too crazy. That's all it's doing. Kind of going to the root. It's not really the root, but it just feels nice to hit that note. And so then you have this kind of call and response between the patterns. So the first pattern and the third pattern have that kind of pluck sound that's kind of more percussive. And then the even pattern, which we have the second one here and 4 over here, or if for you following the numbers, 5 and 7 are the ones that have the percussive, and then 6 and 8 have this kind of guitar pluck sound. Which I keep pretty subtle, because if you just had it hitting on the notes. You can hear when it's filtered, it's pretty tame, but when we open that up, especially without really any velocity sensitivity to these pads, that could have been really annoying. So what I did was I motion controlled the filter and had that coming in and out as it's being recorded in. So what I'm doing is holding down right, so you can hear it right there how I recorded it in. Sounds pretty good. Adds some feel to it without having to kind of sequence in each of the accented notes. You can see the patterns kind of scattered about, but a lot of them are actually landed on the evens. So that means that they're getting swung a little bit and adding a little more funk and feel and syncopation to the rhythm. And you notice it's more so just like a percussive element because it's not much of a melody. Only when the second time does it come around is there's only one note that's different, and it's right there at the 8th step. So it's the same exact thing, very, very simple because the guitars are so strong in this. But now that you know what's going on, let's hear it one more time. So pretty easy there with those steps. And then the drums. We see that there's a pickup in energy taking place. So once again, we got the layered hi-hat on top of the kick. So the kicks are pretty similar again. You got the snare there on the 11th, and you got the kick on the 8th right there. So that kind of carries it, but now we've added in this third row these hi-hats that are kind of open hi-hat shaker style. You can see they're kind of carrying on through the patterns until that last one where I have the alternative shaker. And having it on that off beat like that is classic house feel, but with this different kick pattern and the different snare pattern, it gives it a whole new vibe that I think is pretty fun. And you have additional clicks and things going on these alternative hits. And then a couple extra hi-hats like here that add additional little energy to carry it on throughout the pattern. And then you got that extra click, and then you have this final different shaker that's got a good tone to it that kind of closes it out pretty nicely. And then from there, it jumps into a different section, which we'll talk about next. This next section, which I call the B section, is where we really hear this kind of quartet type of arpeggio taking place, which I sequenced in, which is pretty fun. And that just loops on, and that goes once the drums come back in. But you might have heard when I was doing it in the video live, I was turning on the reverb from the TX6, and I'll turn that on now just so you can get a feel for it. So it's putting it in that stereo space, which kind of makes it feel like it's expanding and creating this, I'll turn that off now, creating this time where it's like really growing, and then it gets sucked back into this mono feel with the drums, which I thought was pretty fun and really allows that arpeggio and the pads to kind of shine through before bringing the drums and bass fully in, though there's bass in this part as well. But the chords are super simple. I just have one per first step per pattern just going through. So that's just... And it just going through, looping like that. I figured out those were chords that were the same ones I played on the guitar. So I just punched them in and then recorded them into the PO-33 and went from there. So this is where we hear this melodic sequence taking place, which is pretty complex. But really all I'm doing is arpeggiating the chords that are being played. And so I'm not going to walk through each of the arpeggiations, but the technique that I used is what I'm going to explain here. And it was pretty much random, is really what it was. So the rhythm I tried to make as sporadic and random as possible. So you see there's only one note that's being hit on a quarter note. That would be like a standard hit. And the rest of them are kind of landing on these even notes, which are the ones that get shifted slightly back because of the swing. And so the only thing that's keeping this feeling grounded and normal is that it's arpeggiating amongst the notes of the chord. And they're jumping up octaves or bringing them back down. And I'm just shifting the octave range of the pocket operator. So what I mean by that is, you hear that there? So I'm just moving the pitch. And that's all I'm doing to kind of create these leaps and jumps. So you can really see I'm just punching in random notes and then seeing how they landed. I'd pick a note where it felt like it should ascend in the sequence and then find something nearby that kind of sounds good but kind of sounds random at the same time. There's not a whole bunch of rhyme or reason to how I did this other than that it's random. Tried not to stick with anything that was like a basic quarter note, but then kept it all within the chords. And you can also hear something's going on. It's not just playing normal. Once again, I'm doing that filter sweep technique where I'm holding down right and I'm bringing down a low pass filter throughout the pattern to keep it a little bit interesting. And once that reverb's turned on, it kind of has this almost aquatic feel where it feels like it's underwater at some points, which is pretty cool. And so that's what's going on with that. And then the drums kick in. And really kind of bring it home, which I think is really fun. And once again, I kept the drums really simple, really familiar, but this time kept that hi-hat going, added a few additional little clicks that were absent in the other parts of the track just to provide some new energy. And you can hear there's a lot more going on in this final row. Look at how I filled it in with more hi-hats. The more hi-hats you fill up empty spots of your sequence, it's going to add a little bit more energy to it. And it still has that open hi-hat going in this third row where it has that offbeat feel, where it's that open hi-hat from like a house track, but those extra hi-hats sprinkled in kind of cooperate with the arpeggiation that's taking place. And it's really just, I'm keeping the standard snare hit right there and then the snare here, or excuse me, not here, on 11. That 5-11 snare vibe is awesome. Around 120, you could slow it down. It's just awesome to create that cool down-tempo feel, almost like a breakbeat vibe. And so that's really what's the only stuff, and that's really it for this track. And so if you enjoyed this, please give it a like and subscribe to my channel. Please leave a thank you in the comments, or if you have any questions, please leave them down below. Also keep an eye out. I'm going to be releasing this track along with a few other of my recorded songs, actually 14 of them, on Sketches Volume 4, which will be coming out on Spotify, all streaming platforms, and Bandcamp as well. I hope you guys have a great week, and I'll see you in the next one.